Some of the most interesting basketball conversations happening right now are not about who is the best player in the league today. They are about whether the greatest player of all time could even survive in the modern NBA. And real former NBA players, guys who actually played the game at the highest level, have been sitting down and having honest conversations about Michael Jordan and whether his game would translate into today's era. Some of what they are saying is going to surprise you. Some of it is going to make you think differently about how we compare players across different generations, and some of it is going to remind you exactly why Michael Jordan is who he is, no matter what era you put him in. The conversation that sparked all of this came from a group of former players sitting around breaking down the game the way only people who have actually played it can. And one of the first things that came up was the idea that Michael Jordan had a limited bag. Now, if you follow basketball at all, you know that the word bag refers to a player's collection of moves, the different ways they can score, the variety of things they can do to get a shot off. And the argument being made was that in today's NBA, where guys like Kyrie Irving and James Harden have these incredibly deep, almost theatrical collections of crossovers, hesitations, step backs, and in-between moves, Jordan's game might look a little more basic, a little more straightforward, and therefore, some people were suggesting, maybe a little less effective. But here is where it gets really interesting, because one of the former players in this conversation pushed back immediately and said something that cuts right to the heart of this whole debate. He said Jordan did not need multiple moves. He said Jordan was just right by you, one dribble, pull-up, fade away, and that was enough to make him the greatest scorer the game had ever seen up until that point. And that observation alone should make everybody think twice before saying Jordan's bag was limited. Because what is the actual purpose of having a bag of moves? The entire point is to score the basketball. That is it. All those crossovers and hesitations and spin moves exist for one reason only, to get a shot off and put the ball in the basket. And if Michael Jordan could get to his spots and score on the very best defenders in the world, flopping gets rewarded with foul calls. Players have figured out how to create contact and draw fouls in ways that were not even part of the conversation in Jordan's era. The entire offensive environment is more accommodating now than it was in the 1980s and 90s. So when someone says that guys like Tracy McGrady, Vince Carter, Ray Allen, or Allen Iverson would be absolutely unstoppable in today's game, they are making a point worth taking seriously. Those players had elite skill sets that were being partially suppressed by the physical defensive rules of their era. Put them in today's game with today's officiating and today's spacing, and the numbers they would put up would be staggering. And if that is true for those players, it is absolutely true for Michael Jordan as well. Jordan, in today's game, with the rules protecting offensive players the way they do now, with the floor spread out the way it is, with hand-checking completely removed from the equation, would not just be effective, he would be operating at a level that the current generation of fans has never seen before. The conversation also got into a really fascinating comparison between Jordan and Kobe Bryant, and this is one of those debates that can go for hours because both players are so closely connected in terms of style, approach, and mentality. One of the former players made the point that Kobe had better footwork than Jordan, and his reasoning was that Kobe had to develop and evolve his footwork because he came into the league later and was playing against progressively more athletic and skilled defenders. The argument was that as the talent level across the league improved over the years, the game itself demanded more sophisticated footwork and more varied post moves to keep up. Kobe responded to that demand by building one of the most technically refined offensive skill sets the game has ever seen. His footwork in the post, his use of the pump fake, his ability to create separation through precise movement rather than pure explosiveness, all of that became the foundation of his scoring as his career went on. But here is the counterpoint that also came up. Jordan was doing things in 1985 that people act like are modern innovations. There is footage of Jordan throwing up shots behind his head in the 1985 season. Backward shots, creative finishes, acrobatic layups, and adjustments in midair that looked like something out of a highlight reel from 2024.
This was not Jordan doing things that were only possible in an older, slower, less sophisticated era. This was Jordan being creative, explosive, and inventive with the basketball in ways that matched and in some cases exceeded what current players are celebrated for. The famous game at Madison Square Garden, where he scored 61 points, includes sequences.
The mental aspect of Jordan's game is something that former players kept coming back to throughout this conversation. One of them made the point that Jordan and Kobe's bag was immaculate specifically because of the mental games they could play. When Jordan caught the ball at the elbow, the defender genuinely did not know where he was going. Not because Jordan had an endless variety of fancy moves to show off, but because Jordan had studied his spot so deeply, had worked on his angles and his timing with such obsessive detail, that every move he made from those spots was equally dangerous. The pump fake, the swing through, the up and under, the pull-up jumper, the drive, all of it ran through the same spots, executed with the same footwork, making it impossible for a defender to predict which option was coming. That kind of mental and physical precision is what the former players in this conversation were recognizing as a bag, even if it does not look like a bag in the traditional sense that modern basketball culture uses the word. And that brings us to a really fundamental question about how we define skill in basketball. Today's basketball culture has become fascinated with handles, with crossovers, with the ability to break a defender down one-on-one through a series of moves, fakes, and direction changes. That is what people mean when they say a player has a bag. And by that definition, someone like Kyrie Irving is at the very top of the list because his handle is genuinely unlike anything the game has ever seen. The things Kyrie can do with a basketball at full speed in traffic are extraordinary. But does having an extraordinary handle automatically make you a better scorer than Michael Jordan? Does the complexity of your move set determine your effectiveness as an offensive player? Because the scoring numbers do not support that conclusion. Jordan scored at a rate and on a level that the players celebrated for their deep bags have not matched across an entire career. Former players in this conversation made the point that a lot of guys in today's game have a move and then bring it back and remix it. They have a whole production around getting to their shot. And there is something to that observation. Some players in today's game have made the process of scoring more complicated than it needs to be. They have moves within moves, hesitations before hesitations, an entire elaborate sequence that needs to play out before they can get comfortable enough to attempt a shot. Jordan did not need any of that. He caught the ball, read the defense, and went, directly, without ceremony, without a 15-step preamble. His efficiency came from simplicity, and his simplicity came from mastery. He had already done all the hard work in practice, so that the game itself felt easy. This is something that former teammates and players who practiced against Jordan consistently talk about. The way Jordan approached practice was on a completely different level from almost everyone around him. One former player in this conversation said that the practice habits of that Chicago team were absolutely crazy. Every single drill was treated like a game situation. The intensity never dropped. And that was because of the leadership of Jordan and Scottie Pippen and Phil Jackson. Jordan made his teammates uncomfortable in practice because his standard was so high that casual effort simply did not exist around him. And that practice standard is what translated into game day dominance. When you have prepared at that level, when every scenario you might face in a real game has already been rehearsed to the point of automaticity, you do not need to think on the court. You just execute. And execution at full speed against elite defenders without hesitation and without wasted motion is exactly what made Jordan's game look so effortless, even when the situation was at its most difficult. The question of whether Jordan could play in today's era is almost the wrong question to ask, because it assumes that Jordan is a fixed product, a player locked into the exact style and approach he developed.
They study the game. They identified what the current environment demands, and they build the skills necessary to meet those demands. If Jordan had grown up playing basketball in the modern era, surrounded by the spacing philosophy and the three-point revolution and the ball-handling creativity that defines the current game, he would have developed differently. He would have added the elements that today's game requires while keeping the competitive fire and the physical tools that made him who he was. He would have been a different version of Jordan, not a worse version, just an updated one. What the former players in this conversation kept coming back to, the point that kept resurfacing no matter which direction the debate went, is that Michael Jordan was the most impossible player to guard that any of them had ever seen or faced. One of them said it plainly and without any hesitation: nobody can guard that man today. And this is coming from people who have watched and played alongside and competed against the best players across multiple generations. Their verdict is that Jordan's combination of athleticism, basketball intelligence, competitive drive, and physical presence would translate into any era. Not just survive, dominate. The Scottie Pippen conversation that came up was fascinating too. One of the former players said that Phil Jackson had told him Pippen was a better basketball player than Jordan, and he clarified what that meant. He said Pippen was the best small forward to ever play the game, the complete package in terms of pure basketball skills. He could shoot, dribble, defend positions 1 through 5, and made everyone around him better on a daily basis. But then he drew the line that separates the two players in the most important way. When you need to get over the hill, when the game is on the line and everything is riding on the next possession, Jordan and Pippen is what gets you there. Pippen was a phenomenal basketball player. Jordan was a winner. And the difference between those two things is what 6 championships look like. You are not going to lose with Michael Jordan. That was said with complete conviction by someone who had watched him up close for years. He will bring you back from 10 down, from 15 down, from 18 down in the fourth quarter, against the best defenders in the world, on the biggest stages the sport has to offer, in moments where every other player in NBA history would have found a way to let the team down. Jordan found a way to win. That is not something you can measure in bag depth or handle complexity or the variety of your moveset. That is something that only exists in a very small number of players across the entire history of the sport. And Michael Jordan had more of it than almost anyone who has ever played the game at any level in any era. The debate about whether Jordan could play today is never going to produce a clean final answer, because basketball does not work that way. You cannot run the experiment. You cannot take Jordan at his peak and drop him into a 2025 NBA game and see what happens. What you can do is listen to the people who played the game at the highest level, who studied Jordan up close, who competed in both the old era and watched the new one develop, and hear what they say when they talk about him honestly. And what they say, consistently and without much hesitation, is that the man was simply different. His game was built on principles that do not expire: intelligence, competitiveness, preparation, efficiency, and an absolute refusal to lose. Those things do not have an era. They belong to every generation of basketball equally. And that is why Michael Jordan remains the measuring stick that every great player who comes after him gets measured against, whether the current era wants to admit it or not.